Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
And welcome back to the Second Bite Podcast. I am thrilled today to have Michael Brown with us from Teamshares. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
Hey, I got so much stuff I want to get into. It's going to be a really interesting episode. Michael is a serial buyer of companies, as is Teamshares. When we get into all that, I want to just do a quick thank you to our sponsor, which are the good people at Cohen. Cohen is an accounting firm, and probably even more than that, a services firm here in Rockville, Maryland. They personally support me and my clients with their accounting. Make sure it's done GAAP appropriate, accrued for properly. They've been doing private equity due diligence work for decades. They're always on the list of best regional accounting firms. You can find them at ecohen, ecohen.com, right here locally. And Michael, you may not know this because it wouldn't filter up to your level, but Cohen is the group that supported us in the transaction that you and I did together, which closed right at the end of last year. So they just really produce great work. But I want to, I was fascinated. So I was fortunate enough just a few months ago to have a client of mine who is in the digital marketing space, focused in the automotive industry. And we did a really great transaction with Teamshares. And I remember the first conversation saying to myself, this is all too good to be true. And I don't know that I believe everything the guys are telling me. And it all turned out to be true. Can you give us just a kind of a quick background on you and just
Sure.
An intro to Teamshares, and then we'll start to unpack it?
Yeah. So I'm Michael Brown. I'm one of the three founders of Teamshares and our CEO. I spent 7 years out of college doing M&A at Morgan Stanley and a couple other firms. And then decided in 2013 to take what I'd learned in the M&A space and become a principal, and went and bought one company and just jumped in and learned how to run it. I mean, I guess it wasn't really a search fund, but it was sort of analogous to that. And then the other two founders worked at the same firm that I was. And so one by one joined up to be other founders. Alex, jumped in, and we ended up doing 8 acquisitions in total. In the electrical contracting and maintenance space. And it was interesting. The first company that we acquired and ran, the largest customer, we had a sort of a high customer concentration customer, like a 33% of revenue situation. And in the middle of a city of 1 million people, they were a 10 billion revenue employee-owned business. And we were amazed, like absolutely fascinated intellectually by what employee ownership did for that company, and clearly the growth. Didn't know what to do with it right away. But fast forward to 2018, 2019, we'd had some mixed success with some failures we recovered from, and some outright successes in acquiring those first 8 businesses. And we started to think about what could we do that would be, I think a little more interesting to us than just simply acquiring businesses, and something that would be interesting for the world and solve this problem at scale, which is, why is it so hard to sell a small business? Because it truly is hard. And we realized that it's just simply there's just not enough buyers for all the small businesses in America, in part because the kids don't take them over anymore. And so our eureka moment was, what if the employees just bought all the businesses? And that's when Teamshares was born. And since then, we have gone on and worked with so far 42 companies to help them convert to employee ownership. I'm sure we'll talk about the details, of which 26 are closed, and the others are in LOI and soon.
So now you guys have raised capital. So you have a committed capital fund.
Yes. Yeah. We have 150 million of capital to fund the acquisitions, and then additional equity on our balance sheet.
Got it. And so when you say 40 companies that we work with and on, in simple terms, you've acquired 26 businesses so far.
26, and then we rarely miss on closing an LOI. It's a sort of a 1 in 20 type of situation. Usually, if The only really time it ever happens is if the sellers try and renegotiate the LOI. So there have been just 2 instances where we've not closed.
Yeah, and
So
we'll
we
come back.
monitor both KPIs.
So, and this is the thing that I found. So when we did our transaction, this is the thing I found fascinating. A lot, this is an economy where people go into business for fame and fortune in most cases, and so a lot of times private equity, like any investor, wants to put money to work, work real hard, grow a big business, and sell it to make a crap load of money. Teamshares has a little bit different view on that, though, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we believe just fundamentally in win-wins, and that that there are some sort of strains on capitalism today. We have a huge issue with wealth inequality. Like, making money is not bad; it's good. We're in the business of making money too, but more can be done to share. And so that is what employee ownership does. And so, our goal, it sounds bananas, but it is something we're going to spend the rest of our lives doing. We're going to try and, create $10 billion of new wealth for employee owners through stock ownership. We started the clock on 100 million of that last year, just in our first, we did a couple in the COVID year. We obviously paused with so much uncertainty. But just the first transactions we did last year, that was starting the clock on $100 million of what will be wealth for employee owners.
So my response to that, a lot of times, actually, the first time I heard it was blah, 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 blah. Right?
Gimmick, right? Yeah, gimmick.
Yeah. Transfer wealth, the world's going to be a better place, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
My client, Ed, the world is a better place for him and the 40-something people he had at his firm. He owned that business for 38 years. And a lot of people were with him for a long time. Yep. You guys gave him, I would say, fair value for the business, not high end, not low end.
Yeah, right in the middle. Yeah.
But you paid 90% cash at close. 90%. And then his management team is either going to grow into running the CEO or you're going to bring somebody in. But then the equity over time is going to transition to the employees. That's so right. The deal structure is pretty simple. He got 90% in cash. He gets 10% in 3 years based on the performance of the stock. Super simple, right?
Yep.
Talk to me about how the system works, how you get ownership to the employees, and how do you make the economics work for you and your investors?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and the only thing I would add to the value prop for sellers, besides employee ownership and the 90% cash at close, is that we don't have a financing contingent. So when you sign a letter of intent with Teamshares, we don't need to go and get the money. And that's why we can close as fast as 30 days.
Right.
So how it works is, you're absolutely right. So at closing, instead of having a seller note, what we do is we ask the selling owners to become our business partners and retain a 10% stake. We give them a guaranteed return on it. And then we together, and it's all known up front at the time of the LOI, that we're going to turn around together as partners. We're going to dilute ourselves. So we'll go from 90% ownership down to 81, and the selling owner will go from 10 down to 9. And the employee owners, everyone in the company, is going to get some proportion of stock. And that 10% is new shares that's subject to vesting. People have to stay 4 years to fully realize that value. That's step one. And the reason why
that happens at close.
That happens at close. And we issue the securities in our software. It's all pretty seamless. It took us a little bit of time. It was a fairly complex project to be able to do that, something normally a law firm would do. Now we built our own software to actually legally issue those shares. So the way that plays out is we start off with 81% Teamshares, 9% former owner, 10% employees. We do that because, one, I think it's just what we've done is we've said we've taken a traditional leadership compensation package and spread it out over the rest of the team. So the new president does have a meaningful portion of that 10%, but not the majority. The rest of it is distributed to any full-time employee. We want it to be broad-based. And then we have 2 mechanisms to increase employee ownership over time. The first is that we use the profits and the cash flow of the business to sell back our stock at a slight premium over time. And then the second is that as the companies start to increase their operating profit and therefore the value of the business, we will have additional sort of free grants of stock to the employees so that everyone is aligned for not breakneck growth, but some amount of continual growth, because that helps everyone else.
And so what do you mean that you're going to buy back your shares from the business?
Yeah. So Teamshares basically says, after their, extra cash flow, after, needed CapEx and reinvestment in the business.
Can we use an example?
Sure.
Let's say a business does $2 million of EBITDA. You own 81. The owner owns 9 still, and the employee pool is 10.
Yep. So we would basically let's assume that there was $1 million of true free cash flow after reinvesting the business growth. That we would take half of that and do a dividend to all shareholders, and we would do half of that to buy back stock from Teamshares and retire it. So basically, you can think of it as like the denominator of the number of shares outstanding is shrinking, and in a tax efficient way, it gets a higher percentage ownership into the hands of employee owners, and that works out to, depending on how much the company is growing, that works out to 2-3% per year, and then of transitioning ownership, and then as the company grows, we accelerate that by advancing another 5% here, another 5% there. So in all, we're obviously only a couple of years into it, heavily financial modeled it, but we anticipate it's going to take at least 10 years to get to 80% employee owned, 20% Teamshares. Along the way, the selling owner, the retiring owner, they have the right to hold those shares for 5 years, up to 5 years. They have the right to put them back to us after 3 years. That's about enough time to get alignment. We want to get them retired and transitioned out of the business in about 6 months, and then they can begin a new chapter as a shareholder and advisor. So there's still a link.
Gotcha. And so you mentioned the new president of the company. So I know that there was some question, because we had a very open conversation about it.
Yep.
If any of Ed's people would be right to run the business. That didn't really intimidate you guys, because your response was, well, then we'll find somebody to run the business.
Right.
What's your view on that, and what's the process there?
Yeah. So we in 9 out of 10 situations expect to go and recruit and place a president who is in their 30s or 40s, typically has significant business experience, but typically not from the industry. And it's a bit contrarian, but it's effectively what Alex and I did back in the day. We were not from the electrical contracting and maintenance industry, but we had good analytical skills and business experience. So we were able to jump in with fresh eyes and focus on working on the business. And we were not able to work in the business. We could not work on an electrical project. We could help improve the pricing. We could help improve the culture. And so we've replicated that model. So for 9 out of 10 businesses, we place an external president. If there is an existing president who really is, basically running the business already, because the owner is pretty much retired and just, monitoring the business, we'll bring in a CFO to make sure that they have the capacity to really implement employee ownership. And we have a team of recruiters. It's actually something myself and the gentleman, Mike, who's sitting behind me, were quite heavily involved in recruiting presidents. Diverse group of people. We've got people who are former, Army and Navy. We've got people who've left McKinsey and Boston Consulting Group, former Walmart, former Diageo, just really great people who are working in the Fortune 100 and are given the opportunity to do. We've really made this job, being the CEO of a small business, accessible to the public for the first time, because as you know, you had to either had to found the business, inherit it, or go and buy it. And so we're handling all the acquisition and underwriting, and then we place a president to run it day to day and put them into a program with other peers to learn how to become a president.
One of the things I know that's standard issue in most private equity playbook is the notion of growing the business with tuck-in acquisitions. Is that part of your game plan as well?
That is inevitable to happen, and it is starting to happen, but it's not a proactive effort at this point. So we do have It's playing out in a couple of ways. There's a company out in California that we have. The bolt-ons haven't closed yet, so I won't say which industry, but some companies in the exact same industry in the surrounding counties. Those are being acquired, and they're sort of expanding the company. So those are sort of classical bolt-ons. And growing by acquisition is a great technique, as you know. In a different part of the country, in Virginia, there is a trades business that we have, and then there's another quite similar maintenance business. And the president that's coming that is running the first business and knocking out of the park has gotten that business in a place where he can really run, treat each company as a division and sit over top of both companies, run them both day to day as a CEO. And so then that's a win-win for them, because now they have ownership stakes in a bigger combined company and more opportunity for advancement.
So you guys, over the last couple of years, have done 20. I mean, you're moving at a torrid pace, right? You've done 26 so far.
26 closed, 42 in total, including the LOIs, and most of those were last year and frankly in the last 6 months, because in 2020 we did 4. We were doing 1 a month in the first quarter, and then everyone knows what happened in the spring. So we paused to let the data play out in the economy. We did 1 to close out the year in December, so that was 4, and then we did another 31 last year on top of that.
It's a remarkable pace. What has surprised you most about the endeavor that you're in, and how well or difficult or challenging it is?
Yeah, a number of things, and actually how we've gotten good at this and are able to do things so quickly is frankly analyzing and recovering from little mistakes we make here or there. But some of the surprises, I was pleasantly surprised. I think the whole team was, how well the rollover equity was adopted. I mean, that exists in the large private equity market, where there may be CFOs in place and you're dealing with a different set of stakeholders. It doesn't really exist in the small business market, and we knew it was the best alignment, but we thought there was going to be a lot of pushback, and I guess it was chicken and egg. We just had to go get 3-4 selling owners to sign up for it, and now it's a non-negotiable. Everyone does, and it's great. So that was a very positive surprise. I think another surprise is when we started, we thought it was going to be both more scalable for our team and better for employee ownership culture to find companies where there was a right hand in place and do an internal promote. And we found that the companies just function much better with a change agent coming in, and not a new sheriff in town, but someone who's a kind, empathetic leader who is going to grow the business but treat people well. We just found that employee ownership is happening faster, and building on the success of the business is just easier with that person in place. So that was another notable surprise.
Interesting. If you look at your pool, right, the cohort that you have, is there any commonalities in there in terms of industry, in terms of multiple size, revenue number, employee headcount, any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, there are some themes, and then there's also some wide divergence. So I think we're trying to prove out that this will work for as much of the economy as possible, but specifically the old economy. So what we do not do e-commerce, or the aggregators or Amazon FBA businesses. We're talking about traditional businesses. So the median age of a Teamshares business is 35 years old.
Wow.
Our cutoff is 10 years, because there are certain situations where someone started again, but has really been in the business. But the median of those companies is 35 years.
What's important about that?
Oh yeah. Well, so there's a couple things. And that leads to the next criteria, is that it's a bona fide retirement sale, which we say the owners need to be in their mid-50s or older, because look, we want them committed to selling, one, so that the transaction is actually going to happen, that they're not just testing the market, and two, that they're going to be our partner and commit to retire and help the next generation of employees in the business have a chance to run this and not turn up bored in 4 or 5 years after the non-compete expires and recreate the business.
Right.
So it's that commitment to exiting and being a partner with us to transition this company. Then there's a quantitative answer that the startup risk for a small business, all the stats we know about businesses failing in their first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. By the time you get to 7 years, you've substantially retired most of that risk. By the time you get to 15, it's basically gone. A company with 15 years has withstood usually 2 economic downturns, and then this is all kind of ephemeral stuff, but there is goodwill in the economy.
Right.
They're literally, even if it's B2B, that name recognition is out there. And so it is. If you've heard of the Lindy effect, it's like the longer you've been in business or been around, the more high probability you're going to survive it.
That's great. What else?
Okay, yeah. So bona fide retirement, U.S. company, bona fide retirement sale. So owners in their 50s or older. No more than 2 retiring owners. It's okay if they're more shareholders, but we find that transitioning 2 owners, more than 2 owners, is really hard. We do have a preference for 1. And then at least 2 managers. We don't expect there to be a CFO or anything like that, but at least like the bare minimum. And I should say, from an operating profit range, we go down to 300,000-400,000 and up to 2 million, so pretty wide range. Down at that low end of the market, we need at least 2 middle managers. So it could be like an office manager and a superintendent. That's sort of enough that we can put a president in the mix on. We value the businesses off of the tax returns. It's the consistent way for us to know, just given there's a quality variance in different companies' internal books, we just keep it consistent and simple. And then there are some other sort of nuanced things that, like customer concentration. It's really hard if there's a 50% customer. It doesn't mean we can't do it, but if there is, that's not a situation where we can do 90% cash flow. That would have a meaningful earnout if there was that kind of customer concentration.
So then and that's super helpful. Mm-hmm. So if I'm listening and I meet those criteria, mm-hmm. Can I just reach out to you online or call the Teamshares office and get a look?
I mean, we'll always be polite and respond, and we may even get on the phone, but we really don't like to use the referral channel, and it's a little bit awkward, to be honest, because we have people referring all the time. There's a couple things that are going on. So one, just from our end, we have 72,000 leads a year and close on, so it's a fraction of 1% probability that it's going to work out. And so we'll usually get on the phone to be a courtesy, of the referrer and, for the business owner, because we're rooting for all business owners, but it's unlikely to work out that way. The second thing is that there's just so many gates for the selling owner to get through emotionally, to be committed to sell, to packaging up. And so for that reason, if you look at of the 42, I think only 1 of the companies was direct, and that was like a family friend. So we basically don't do referrals. In fact, we've evolved to say, hey, we'll get on the phone, but we say to them, you do need to hire a broker to go and show that you're committed to sell and get your information.
Yeah, and this will sound a little bit self-serving, but there's certainly a lot that we will do preparation-wise and all to make sure that if we sign that letter of intent, it gets to close, right?
There's just so much. I mean, I think for us too, they need independent advice, and very few owners ever sell a business twice. It's their first time. It's highly emotional. None of it is rocket science. It's all trainable and learnable, but you're trying to learn it at the same time while running your business, while trying to understand the stuff and negotiate. And get through a legal process and provide diligence information. It's a lot. And so at a minimum, just like the buffer that an advisor provides.
And it's so true if we've got dozens of episodes on Second Bite podcast now, and they're all CEOs and owners, and almost all of them say the same thing. I just didn't realize everything that's going on to get a deal, to get my company sold. It's way more complex and difficult and challenging than I would have ever imagined, or my accountant thought it would be, or whatever the case is.
That's right.
I will say, so I personally, with the transaction we did, which was in December of 21, had a great experience. I remember when we get in, and I don't know how many you closed in November, December, but I think it was like 8 or 10.
That sounds right.
And I remember saying to myself, this is going to be a disaster. I'm going to get different forms with wrong names, and people won't remember who I am, and everybody's going to be late for phone calls. And now I literally felt like I was the only deal you guys were working on. So kudos to you and your team, because the team that we worked with was great. How do you have a system? How have you scaled up Teamshares to kind of meet what you hope will be the level of demand that you make?
Yeah. I mean, at the highest level, we're motivated by one, very genuinely, like going back to it's not a gimmick. We're motivated by wanting to spend our careers doing this and solve this problem and address wealth inequality while building a business. Because this isn't a charity. To have this impact, you need to build a profitable business that's able to self-sustain itself. But there is a very strong mission here, and everyone is very motivated, and everyone is very focused on what I'll call process engineering. So if you look at and it's not just software engineers, but if you look at the team of people working on just the transaction element of our business, the upfront acquisition, that is about 16 people, of which 10 are software people and 6 are business people. And so we are constantly adding new features to our software to try and reduce manual steps in the process. And then even in the things that we highly value live interaction, right? And so like the moment something speaks to us, we'll get on an airplane, we'll do what it takes. We want that to be a Teamshares company, earn the trust of the owner. But there's a lot of, very repetitive things. So that's one part of it, is that we are trying to constantly, come up with new techniques to speed things up. And then the second thing is that we have assembled, like an assembly line, but with a very, very well curated handoff and a team of people from a range of disciplines. So like the private equity model, right, is you have someone who did investment banking, right, 2 years experience, and then they work on, they go to a private equity firm, they're an associate, they work on 0 to 2 transactions that close a year, right? Ours, we've broadened out who is working on it. So we have people who are former consulting, former investment banking, people have none of that experience at all, right? Handling some of the coordination pieces, and are just, very affable, very considerate, empathetic people. We have a lawyer, we have a paralegal, and we have people that did, transaction accounting diligence reports at some large firms. And so we're doing all these activities, but we're trying to really cut it down to its bare essentials. So here's a tangible example. I mean, our due diligence list is, less than 20 items, including legal and accounting. We just focus on what truly matters, and we don't do diligence for diligence sake. We're just trying to validate the tax returns and make sure, there's no reputational issues, like, closed businesses that were under the same ownership that have a, tax lien on them or something like that.
Excellent. Yeah. And you accomplished all of those things. There's a bunch of monotony. I worked with Drew, I worked with Julie Mack, I worked with John Boyan. So shout out to those guys.
Yeah,
Let me ask you the last couple things.
Mm-hmm.
You have been a business owner, small business owner. You bought a business, you've sold a business, and now you're in the business of acquiring businesses. Mm-hmm. For somebody that's beginning to think about this, or is at the point of that, man, now I've been doing this 25 or 30 or some odd years. Here's a great opportunity that I can hand this business off to my team that's been with me for so long and still get my value of the business out. What are the couple pieces of advice you would give generally when it comes that time that maybe owners wouldn't think of?
Yeah. Well, I think that the most important thing is that the owners are really ready, and no matter who they succeed the business to, just on a personal level, they just need to be really ready emotionally and financially to do it, because it's typically their biggest personal asset. Their salary at some point is going to turn off, and they're going to get, depending on the industry, 4, 5, or 6 times the operating profit of the business. And if they were to just own it for 6 more years, they could get that or more if they grow it. So they need to be ready. Like, people sell when they're ready, and if they don't, we've seen this all the time. Someone tries to sell a business in their late 40s, maybe because they're having a bad couple of months, stressed. So I think it's important, and I'm not saying that in a self-serving way. I'm saying that there's just so much regret from people who sell their business too early. I would advise those people to think about who they might need to hire and forego a little short-term profit to make their life a little easier if they're feeling that stress. I think that I'll say something that is both true and self-serving. It's very easy to write a letter of intent. And most buyers, outside, if you're down in the sort of sub $1 million operating profit space, you're generally out of the range of private equity. You're not dealing with people with committed capital who've done this before routinely. You're dealing with a well-meaning individual who has likely never bought a business before and is all in. And unlike in the mortgage space where you go and get a pre-qualification letter from B of A and then you're going to get that damn mortgage, not the same in the SBA loan space, right? So many transactions fall apart and it's painful. We see this all the time. We have, probably 8 of our companies came back to us after a broken LOI, and they were extremely grateful because it was just, I'll give you an order of magnitude. We made an offer for $4 million and someone else made one for $4.5 million, and we were stretching. We're not doing this out of, arbitrary, no, we won't go above 4. It's just at the outer limits of our ratios. We couldn't go any higher. And just because someone writes a letter of intent doesn't mean they even have the capital. It's a non-binding piece of paper. So make sure you know who your counterparty is, because the failure rate of LOIs, there is no good data on this, but there's one guy named Brent Beshore who wrote in his book, he thinks up to 75% of LOIs don't close. It is both true and self-serving that I'm saying that, but it is genuine advice that I would give to any seller. And then I think the final thing is that know what you're searching for. There is no moral judgment in this statement. Everyone has to decide what's right for them, but we see a full range of people who are just like, look, I've worked hard, I'm maximizing cash, that's what matters, and it's okay, and I've treated my people along the way, and whatever happens afterwards happens. And there's people who really they need the right home for their employees and their customers and some level of continuity. And so depending on who your buyer is, certainly with the larger size, the reason why, once you get north of $1 million of EBITDA, why some of those multiples may get higher is the buyer may be planning to really reduce some of your staff. Again, there's no moral judgment, but you just need to know what you're walking into. So for when you sort of face your team afterwards, just to be sort of mentally prepared for what the next chapter is going to look like.
Yeah, and I only have one piece of data to offer to support that. But in the transaction we did with Ed, we had one offer that was 5 or 6 or 7% higher. And it was a very standard, I want to say 65% cash at close, 3-year earnout. Ed's at risk. He was going to be able to retire after a year. The business had to still perform, on and on. And it's hard to turn that off if I still have to worry about collecting the rest. Right. So the notion of getting 90% cash at close and the certainty to get to close made it a very easy decision on our end. So I would kind of contribute that to your comment there. One last question that I always end with, Michael. I know that you've been very successful in your business life, in your personal life. You got 2 little ones at home, in the community. You're making a real impact with Teamshares. Is there anything that you would point to that has been instrumental in where you are today, whether that's a mentor or a book that you read or an experience that you had that you could pass on that you think would be relevant?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. I'm trying to think of what comes to mind. I mean, I think for the person running the business today, how I really learned how to run a business and so many other peers is this book called Traction by a guy named Gino Wickman. And it's just like once you read it, you can't unsee it.
We've talked about EOS, the Entrepreneur's Operating System, a few times.
But I'd say for what, what's transpired, I think there's a lot of things. I think I had a fortunate upbringing and, was able to live in this country. I was actually able to immigrate to this country from Canada. I was fortunate enough to have a job in investment banking and learn some of this stuff really early, and then be surrounded by, in that space, 2 other founders who we're equally as excited and committed about building this company. But I think, in setting out on this journey, again, we weren't doing it as a charity. We did want to build some baseline level of financial independence, but that wasn't the explicit goal. Money was never a scorecard for us. And I think in the early days, it was a little bit more, or at least felt like, ooh, we're not there yet. It felt stressful. And so Alex, one of our other founders, he kept encouraging us to just really enjoy the journey. And I think when we realized the opportunity to help all these small businesses become employee owned while building a great business, it just was a level of fulfillment that allows us to get through all the hard times, be really happy at work every day.
Yeah, it's a really interesting mix because it's not, it's grounded in economics and financial principles, but still does a lot of really good for hardworking people that otherwise maybe wouldn't have an opportunity for ownership at a business that they've helped build. So right. I know that Ed was thrilled that was the end conclusion, the last chapter that he wrote in his business career. I know it meant a lot to him.
It's his legacy now. I mean, I think that's the pitch is to them. They don't know the employee ownership thing is out there because the typical structure of the ESOP is way too complicated and expensive.
Way too complicated, never makes sense, and on from there. So yeah. I am a fan of Teamshares. I'm super happy that you would come on today.
Well, thanks for having me.
And since we're talking about capitalism and the rest, and since you don't take direct inbound, in the email, in the notes to this episode, there's your contact information. There's also my contact information. We've had a very good experience with the people at Teamshares and could help somebody navigate if they wanted to explore this, and we'd be happy to talk to you. So although you can't get Michael on the phone, you can get Todd on the phone, and he would be more than happy to talk to you through what might be an excellent opportunity from that standpoint. So Michael, I will say thanks to you and Teamshares. I'll say thanks to the people at eCone for being our sponsor. And this has been an eye-opening episode. I'm imagining that we'll read and hear a lot more about Teamshares in the future. So thanks for being a guest.
I hope we will, and thanks for having me. It was great to spend time with you.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.